These are some more fabric samples that we had from Perfect Grace. This one here we used as our lining because there was a lot of it, and it's got a very slight stretch to it, so it'll be good for ease. We also did all our twirls in it as well, which we then let use for the lining. Everything else is just sort of what was around. These two are the kind of the thinner ones, but they're still not really what we're looking for, because we're looking for like a little crinkle type fabric. These were the suitings from the Perfleet stores. So we originally started off with these like green colours. They didn't come up very well on the video, but they're sort of like dark emerald green. They were like the first ones that we picked out because we really like the colour, but I think they were not great ideas because we all figured that the embroidery motifs and the beading looked a little bit like military frogging, and we didn't want it to look too military because she's not military, she is aristocratic, so we didn't think that would be too appropriate. We also found a nice wool, a brown wool, but obviously she's very high up, and I think we thought that like a navy or a green or something a navy would be a better colour for someone like that, as opposed to brown, which is a bit sort of more middle lower class feel to it. We also found a moleskin, but again it was like a sort of like greyish colour, and although it's a nice fabric and looks nice to work with, we didn't think it was appropriate for this particular costume. We also found a black velvet, which Elle was in love with, and is very, very nice, but we figured that black was like a morning colour, so we didn't want her to be wearing a morning colour, and velvet is very difficult to work with, like notoriously difficult. It's also very difficult to keep clean because obviously it picks up dust very easily, and for a costume like this we didn't think it was appropriate either. We then found the navy wools, so that was the first one we picked. You can't tell on here, but it's quite a very rough textured wool. It picks up dirt very, very easily. It picks up like dust and fluff and bits of thread and everything, so we didn't really want to use that. We wanted something a little bit nicer. We then found this one, which was a bit better. Still got slightly fluffy texture to it, but it's a bit of a brighter colour, slightly brighter colour, and it doesn't pick up as much dirt. But then we found this one, which is sort of like a it's got like a diagonal woven texture in it. I can't remember what type of weave that is, but it was a lot nicer than the other two, and it looks very a little bit nicer. So the texture looks a bit nicer as well. So that's the one we settled on in the end. These are the attempts we did to dye the fabrics that we liked for the bib, different colours, but as you can see it didn't particularly go very well. So these are the original samples that we have, so there's 3 different times. I'm assuming that this one's probably like a polyester of some kind because it did pick up some of the dye, but we think that there's viscose in all 3 of these, which is very hard to dye regardless. So we first used navy dispersed dyes, and we were hoping that it would come out like a very, very dark navy because we could still use that for the bib then. But as it happens, these two were the more promising ones, and they picked up purple. And then we thought this one might possibly be usable, but when we compared it to the wool, it was very green. It's like a sort of like teal blue, and it just looked really, really bad, so we weren't able to use those. Elle took the fabric samples home, and she got some Dylon machine dye and put them in the machine with it, and apparently they came out looking black, but as soon as she rinsed them out, they just went to this sort of like stone, gross, grubby looking colour. So that was also a no-starter, which is a shame because these were like the perfect textures that we wanted for this particular project. Then I went to Kay's Textiles in Westcliff, which is the local fabric shop for Southend. I found a remnant of this, which is like a black pleated chiffon. And while it's not exactly what we wanted, it's I figured it was close enough. So I got it and I did some experiments with it. So I ironed it first to see what it would do, and obviously because it's polyester, it just irons straight out. There are very, 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 very faint lines where the creases used to be, but it's not that big a deal. I then dumped a bit in water and boiled it for like 10 minutes, and it creased like this. And it looks really, really cool. So then I was just like, okay, I'll twist it up and throw it back in again. So I had another sample piece that I twisted. It's kind of hard to describe. It's like when you twist something so much and then let it go slack, and then it sort of twists up on itself and then holds the twist. So that's what I did. And then I secured the end with thread and then dumped it in the pot. And it did this, which is exactly what we're looking for. So that was probably a technique that we could have used. So the only trouble with this particular fabric is that you can kind of see it a little bit there, but it's when the dye came out, so it wasn't actually solid black anymore. It had like cloudy patches on it, which was not ideal. I then tried the same technique with other fabrics, so I used the Georgette from Fabricland. That came out probably the best, but it still has this sort of like mottled texture that I don't really like. Then the viscose, which did basically nothing. It just looks like it's not been ironed, which is very sad because I like the viscose the best. And then the crepe de chine, which again worked very, very well because it's polyester, but it still has the weird shine on it. So the Georgette and the crepe de chine work the best out of the three, but they're still not perfect. Maybe I'm just being perfectionist, but that was the outcome of that. Then we have the dye samples for the net. So I had a lot of problems with this. The first samples that we did, Elle had mixed up the batch and she had gotten mixed up, and she had basically dumped the whole jar of mixture into, or solution into the dye bath as it is. So the net samples are coming out very, very, very dark each time. And I couldn't figure out why, and then I tried to recreate it and they were coming out a lot lighter, so I had to basically start again. I also added some vivid violet in with the disperse navy, but the first batch I did was a very, very old batch, so it came out a lot lighter, and then when I tried to recreate it, it came out a very violent purple. So then I had to do a third set of tests with fresh navy and fresh violet, and then eventually found the right solution for what I wanted, but it took a very, very long time and it was very, very annoying. And a lot of net was wasted because I just couldn't get my head around the dyes. It's very frustrating because I like doing dye work, but I like to think I know what I'm doing, but obviously there's still a lot I have left to learn and things I need to take into consideration when I'm dyeing larger things, so, and mixing dyes as well, so it was sort of a big steep learning curve. These were I haven't labelled them, but these were two different types of other net that I found, because basically when doing these I ran out of the tulle that I had originally bought from Fabricland. So I was looking for alternatives in greys. The only one that was there was this very like thick net that had already been dyed a little bit grey, and with the same mixture as the net up here, it just came out completely way too dark, and it was far too thick for what we wanted. So that was something that we didn't use in the end. The final attempt to dye in the net. By this point, I was a bit more wary about using about what quantities were needed and how long. So I used the dye, the boil washer, the wash boiler, one of those. And I was being very cautious about adding the violet dye because I was worried that it would overpower the navy again, despite the fact that on my smaller samples it had come out fine at the same ratio. So in theory it should have been fine at the larger ratio. So I spent a lot of time dithering about adding small quantities of dye at a time, and it was basically coming out okay. I could have just done the first sample and then had done with it, dyed the rest of the net, and we would have been fine, but I didn't. So I also, for some reason, thought that I could put cotton tape in with the disperse dye and it would also go navy, but obviously it wouldn't because it's a natural fibre and disperse is a synthetic dye, so it came out very, very purple. So that wasn't used in the end. And then these are my instructions for the wash boiler, so just sort of instructions myself because I'd not used it before. And Jackie from 3rd year was very kind enough to show me how to use it. So yeah, I was adding the violet dye in 50ml batches. Well, it was 25ml at first and I had to speed it up, so it's then 50ml at a time out of 250ml total that I should have added just straight up. But that, me dithering and spending hours trying to work out quantities and doing samples, just ended up in the water just boiling away. So I really shouldn't have done that, but it is what it is. Then a little bit on sourcing beads. I just realised I haven't put in this stuff, but basically I sorted beads. I was looking for beads on eBay to start with, and at Hobbycraft, because I was looking for very specific beads that I couldn't find. Elle found, or was given, this little beading set from a friend, I think, and we liked these grey beads in here and they worked perfectly for what we wanted, but she didn't know where to get the beads from again, so she managed to find some online, which is this picture that she sent us in the WhatsApp. I did actually find this necklace in a charity shop which had the same colour beads at the same size, but they were very, very cheap looking and had they were plastic and they had like mould lines, so they were not suitable at all, despite the fact that they would have been perfect otherwise. This is designing the beading motifs. So this was the original sort of when I originally got all the beads, I just sort of like pushed them together on top of the fabric as an example, just to show everyone else what I was thinking. That was my first attempt at beading. We had these like buttons that I found, but I think if we did use them we would have had to age them in some way because they're way too like shiny and new looking. We didn't use them in the end because they just didn't look right. These are other people's samples. This is these two here are the final samples that we agreed on, and that's my sample. So we have the like big faceted bead in the middle, we have smaller faceted beads all the way around, and then mixed in with the grey pearls. Got even smaller faceted beads around the outside, and then seed beads all the way around the whole thing. So it looks better. It's coherent with the picture that we had. This is Anya. She laid out the different samples that she'd made on top of the collar just to see how they would look. And it looks kind of cool. So that's good. And we also used the failed purple net that I had accidentally made for the samples, just so we wouldn't be wasting time or net. So it worked out fairly well in the end. This is how we sorted out the layout for the beads. So I copied out the collar pattern for the jacket, marked out seam allowances, well not seam allowances, but how far we wanted the beading away from each edge. So it was 1.5 centimetres on this side and then 1 centimetre on this side, I think. And then marked where each motif would go, based roughly on the photo and just how big the beading motifs were. We then numbered them, so 1, 2, blah blah blah, and we each took 3 numbers and we made a pair of motifs to match that size. So, and everyone had a copy of this, and it was a really good way of coordinating the beading and making things the same, but not having to be in the same room and do the beading, because I think it was about 36 hours of work for beading alone, and that would have been really annoying if we had to all be together for that to make sure that we were coordinated enough. But these are Elle's and Anya's finished motifs ready to sew, all laid out on top of the pattern, which is really, really cool. These are my finished motifs that I did. I took the shorter ones, and yeah, I think it was about 7,000 beads in total we calculated, so it's a lot of work has gone into these beads. And these are the progress pictures, so it's like building up the motifs. These are the start of the stomacher, bead patterns, but they're not finished. There aren't very many photos of those because they were done quite late in the project. This is the half-scale skirt pattern that Annie did. So we, at the beginning of the project, we were worried that there would not be enough booty, to quote Anya. So we wanted to make the S shape without having to change too many of the undergarments. So Anya made a half-scale skirt pattern and made a little faux bum roll, and then was like messing around with pins. But the trouble that we found is that if we had the bum roll to cut like the back centre, there's only one seam on the skirt, which is the centre back seam, but that's also where the placket would have to go. And if it's a curved seam, that's not going to work. So that was sort of an experiment that we tried that didn't really go very well. These are the pictures of the jacket toile. So I sewed up the jacket toile. Basically, once we'd done all the patterns and scaled them up, we rotated. So I took the jacket, Elle took the petticoat, and Anya took the skirt, and we made toiles of each. I found that with the box pleats at the back, to start with, I sewed up that seam along with all the other seams, but then found that it was very difficult to iron the box pleat open evenly. So like you can see here, so that section is considerably larger than that section, and then it shows very, very like obviously on the other side, and it was very difficult to make a neat finish. So what I found was if I left that seam unsewn, ironed out all the creases first, and then sewed it up, then it worked a lot better and it looked a lot neater. So that's something to note. We also found that the side seams on the jacket were out by about an inch, which later turned out to be a patterning problem. When Annie was scaling up, she got a number wrong and it wasn't picked up until just then. So we had already got everything cut out by that point, but it didn't affect it enough to be a problem because we managed to work around it. This is the jacket toile, so it was a fitting. We left the grown-on collar on the jacket toile, and then we marked, folded it back, marked where we wanted it, and then chopped it off later. The fitting itself didn't take very long. We had to, we moved it up at the shoulder by about an inch so that the bust dart stayed where it should be on the bust, and took it inside, but other than that it was a perfect fit for Elle. Really, really good first fitting. Yeah. In the early stages, so that's Elle wearing the corset over the skirt. I think it was a little bit tight at this stage, so we moved the waistband down on the skirt, which also helped with the petticoat problems, but it just opened it up a little bit more so that we had more waistband space. That's the jacket sewn up without the collar. That came together very, very quickly as well. I think Elle, we rotated again for that one, so Elle had the jacket to sew up. I did the petticoat. I started on the petticoat, and then Anya had done the skirt, I think. One thing though is that Elle had accidentally sewn the top of the box pleats closed, which was probably a coordination problem because I didn't actually explain how the box pleats worked, but it was fairly easy to fix, so it wasn't that big a deal. And this is the first official fitting, so we were already way ahead of our, this is the first official fitting, so we were ahead of schedule with the fittings to start with because we'd already done the fitting previously on the pattern. So the pattern had already been fitted once over the corset, adjusted, and then that had been translated onto the wool fabric we were using for the jacket. So it fit really, really well the first time. There weren't really any problems. It worked okay. It's about sewing on the collar, so I think Elle had done the collar. Elle and Anya had both drafted the collar pattern together, and then Elle had sewn it up. So Anya had also marked with pins where each motif would lie. Although this was quite early in the project, it gave us a good idea of how big we needed them to be. We also did I also managed to roll over the hem of the collar so that it would, on the flip side, it would just look like a flat collar. It wouldn't look like it had a very obvious seam, so it looked very neat. The only trouble being is that she accidentally sewed it onto the jacket upside down, but again, that was easily rectified. We just had to just took it off and flip it over, so it wasn't a big problem. So the petticoat gave us a lot of problems. So we didn't realise until we put the petticoat on the mannequin and realised that the back hem, or the back portion of the hem, was hanging down considerably lower than the front portion of the hem. We discovered that it's because it was designed to be put over a bustle. So we borrowed one from the studio and we put it on a mannequin and put the petticoat over the top, and lo and behold, it looks as it should do in this picture here. With the skirt over the top, it obviously doesn't look very nice at all, because it's just two different eras, and even 10 years apart, which is the surprising thing about this, they still don't work. So the petticoat was 1892, I think, and the skirt was 1910, so 20 years apart, and the shape of them are just so completely different. So we had to figure out a way of altering the petticoat to fit under the skirt, because the skirt would not alter to fit over the top, and it was either that or start completely from scratch. This is the ruffles samples that we did for the petticoat before we started putting it together. This should probably be earlier in my folder actually, but for now it's fine. So this was 1.5 times gathering, so it's very sort of flat. It doesn't really do very much other than look like a ruffle. This is the 2 times gathering, which was more full, and I think was the length that we went for in the end. And then this is the 3 times ruffle, which is very heavy. It's basically almost solid all the way up here. It's quite dense gathering, but it looks quite nice. And then we also experimented with making the gathers even fuller. This one has a little bit of gathered net, about that wide underneath, and then this one is obviously sewn upside down and then flipped back over, so it gives it an extra puff. I think for the top ruffle we ended up doing this just to give it an extra, just to make it go out more and be fuller. But the other ones are sewn like this, just normally. These are my boning samples. So with the petticoat, we decided we were going to try putting a boning hoop in the bottom to try and help it hold out more, because that was our first port of call after the fitting, when we realised it was going to be the wrong shape. So we wanted to see if just holding it out at the hem would help. So I've done a bunch of boning samples because I haven't really done much with boning yet. So this one is one with not long enough, so obviously it's going to not hold it as it should. This one is just right, so the boning meets the 2 ends. It's very snug in there, but it's not going to like move around, or it's not straining the fabric any. And then this one is too much boning, so it's very obviously warping the fabric. Even the boning channel is warping, so it's not ideal. These ones are joins, so because it's going to be a hoop going around the bottom of the hem, I wasn't sure how to join the 2 pieces of boning while also still making them removable. So the 2 options were sewing the boning in so it was permanent, or making it removable but finding some way of joining the 2. So this one I stitched 2 sections of boning together and it's just fixed in there. It's a little bit bulkier there, but it's not like noticeable. This is with 2 ends of boning meeting in the middle, so the idea is it like loops all the way around and then comes back to there. So these are the two ends of the boning. It's very flimsy. It sort of like wobbles around and it won't make a complete circle. It'll just sort of flop and make it a sort of heart shape instead. This was leaving an opening for the boning so that it could come out and be removable. And then these were the 2 different types of attaching the boning together. So this one is hand sewn, this one is machine sewn with a zigzag stitch. And because the boning is the plastic boning and it has the strips of plastic all woven together, it's possible to do that. Obviously with steel boning or anything else, that's not going to be possible. And then this is my piece de resistance. So this has 2 channels of boning in here. So, but they're 2 separate channels. So the boning can slide over the top of each other, but still be removable. So these ends, there's an end under there and there's an end there, and they are both separate. So if that was in a big loop, it would just be 2 ends, but they overlap by about 2 inches. And then as a final test, I made it so that it has a removable section in it, but it still has that overlap. So this is the one that I tried for the petticoat. So you can take the boning out, you can put it back in again, and it's 1 strip of boning, but it overlaps enough that it's not fixed. You don't have to keep it in there if you don't want. But yeah, so I'm quite proud of that sample, and it went really, really well. And it doesn't look too bad on the other side either. All there is just one. If you can get it right, if you can get it neat enough, it'll just be 2 rows of stitching all the way along, but then with 1 like row of stitching downwards where the boning channel underneath is closed off. But other than that, it works really, really well.